Sabah al khair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad, and I'll be hosting this wonderful conversation with the one and only Saeed Arikat, who would join us for at least an hour to address, for the second time, this is part two of questioning the state, um, addressing the Mr. Saeed Arikat, who is Al Quds correspondent in Washington D.C. and has prominent presence at the State Department briefings and beyond. Before I introduce Saeed officially and formally, let me say that this is part of the Gaza collaborative project, which you can find more about at palestineandcontext.org. سعيد صباح الخير كيفك how are you
Sabah Noor, I am fine. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us. I can't keep up with your fan base online, so we had to talk to you directly and ask you to come back and join us. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I'll say a few words about Saeed, and we will then dive right into it. Saeed Ariqat has been the Washington bureau chief of the prominent Al Quds Daily newspaper and an adjunct professor at American University. Currently, his reporting centers around the United States Department of State. He is a frequent guest on Arab Satellite TV as commentator on U.S. politics and its foreign and security policies. From summer of 2005, he served as the United Nations spokesman for Iraq and was based in Baghdad from 2005 to 2010. Very tough years. He
Yes.
traveled and worked in every region/city in Iraq and became intimately involved with the constitution and the 10 different national and regional elections that occurred during his tenure there. Saeed holds a BS degree from the University of San Francisco and an MS degree from California State University in Long Beach. We are hosting him today to address a number of topics related to the Department of State briefings, um, as we approach the realm of the absurd regarding such briefings and the professionalism or quote unquote professionalism and veracity of the spokesperson's responses on Gaza developments. Saeed will address his recent experience during foreign policy briefings at the State Department. We feature we will feature heated exchanges sometimes with DOS representatives that became emblematic of strategies of evasion, double standards, and misinformation employed by spokespersons of the state, including on last week's flower massacre in northern Gaza, which was documented on camera. Saeed, we have a lot to talk about. So before we get going, would you like to update us on any recent developments, notably what is happening with the potential ceasefire or truce and the potential also invasion, full scale invasion of Rafah?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm always honored to be with you. The latest thing that happened in Cairo is the talks broke down without any results, without concluding anything. Although people in the administration here, they tried to say, well, look, it's not all lost. The Hamas delegation remained in Cairo, and that is a good thing. It seems that there may be a good opportunity for the resumption of talks. It seems that Israel and Hamas are far apart on a number of issues, mainly the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, which people, and so on. The list of people that they want released. Israel claims that Hamas has not fulfilled its obligation or its commitment or its promise, whatever they want to call it, to supply a list of names and so on and their current conditions, health conditions, while being captive. So that's where things stand. The Egyptians seem to be saying, yeah, things are good. The president of the United States came out yesterday and he said he's determined to have an immediate ceasefire. Yeah, we saw that his vice president did the same thing on Sunday. So this is where we are. it, as far as the Palestinians in Gaza are concerned, none of this really matters because they are facing starvation, they are facing bombardment, they are facing very grotesque attacks by Israel, as we have seen last Thursday with the flower massacre. So yeah, all this notwithstanding, it seems that the war will continue to go on, or the bombardment, Israeli bombardment, will continue to go on.
Is there, Saeed, is there any kind of consideration to be made regarding what is happening inside Israel right now in terms of the conflicts, internal conflicts? Some people have made much of it, others have actually minimized its impact, given that in a war cabinet, usually these schisms are contained.
Right. Right. It is rather odd that you have a member of the cabinet come to Washington to meet with the vice president on Tuesday, meeting with the Secretary of State Blinken in the State Department and so on. I'm talking about Benny Gantz, a member of the war cabinet. That apparently he has done so despite opposition by his prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is this is a kind of an odd situation where there's an obvious split in the cabinet itself. It seems that at least on the face of it, the United States is playing one person against another. I mean, to host Benny Gantz in the White House at a time when they have refused thus far to receive Netanyahu, probably they are trying to send a message that we can we will work on alternative to Netanyahu. Now, they send these political messages. They have always opposed Netanyahu. I mean, it goes back before October 7 on the issue of the judicial reformations, whatever judicial reforms and so on. This schism, as you called it, has deepened, and it has become more pronounced. Although the United States is really in step with the war. I mean, day after day, what we hear from the administration, from spokespeople of the administration, whether the White House, the Pentagon, or the State Department, is emphasis on that the United States will continue to support Israel in pursuit of its goals that were stated in decapitating Hamas, hunting the leadership, changing the regime in Gaza, and freeing the hostages. While in fact, the other messages are that you only can do this through diplomacy.
And today is, of course, a major day for elections. Is there anything you'd like
Right.
to say here in the United States? Is there anything you'd like to say on this before we get into our specific topics?
Absolutely. I think that the administration has gotten quite nervous after last Tuesday in Michigan, when we saw in Michigan 100,000 people voted uncommitted. So it was a big slap on the face to the Biden administration that has taken the Arab votes and the Muslim votes for granted. The expectation was 10,000 votes, and the result was 100,000 votes. So that shows it's not only Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians, and but also a wide range of people who are really quite upset with the Biden's policy towards this war in Gaza, with its total support for this genocide in Gaza. So yes, I mean, and we saw when Biden was licking his ice cream and talking about the ceasefire a week ago, and he said maybe in a week. I think he was trying to sort of pull a fast one on the voters in Michigan. It didn't work. We saw statements yesterday. Today is Super Tuesday. We saw some statements that are really probably designed for political expediency. So yes, I think that the message by progressive Democrats is that you cannot take us for granted. If you want to have a chance at winning the November election, then you better do something and do it fast. And the one thing that we need is an immediate ceasefire, which the U.S. can impose, sending aid in trucks, not by it's not for showmanship like they did with the airplane drop when they dropped ready to eat meals. 38,000 to a population of 2.2 million. So absolutely, I think that the this day is a very important day. I believe that messages will be sent to the Biden administration, whether in places like California or Virginia.
All right, so we will of course be watching what's happening tonight, and as many of us have noticed, we are several months away from elections, so anything can happen. But maybe we can return to this at the end if we have time. I'd like to take us now to a couple of exchanges that you have had with uh, Mr. Miller at the State Department briefings. And we will then also later on at intermittent times go back to previous exchanges a few months ago, because it's important to see not only things as they are at a particular moment, but also the trajectory, which is actually quite consistent and constant, irrespective of changes on the ground, which is basically what is very interesting to observe. So we will go to. Um, I will actually go to your. Let me see. Make sure I'm able to. We will go to your. There we go. This is your feed actually, and let's make sure that we have the right speakers on. So this is your exchange from the press briefing in March 4th. We will look at them one at a time, and then we will address the different aspects of the conversation. It looks like we don't have audio directly from the system, so I'm going to load up the video that we have, the same video of the event. I had plan B this time.
Okay. Uh,
Sorry, I was supposed to come to you, but
Thank you, Matt. A couple of things in your response to Humaira and to Sean on the what happened last Thursday. You're saying that we've seen what desperate people needing food and so on. Are you saying that the tragedy was the result of the stampede of people?
there's an investigation ongoing by the government of Israel. I know they've released a preliminary assessment, but there's a further investigation going on. But clearly, the reason all those people were out there in the first place at 4:30 in the morning, I think it's easy to lose sight of that. This is not in the middle of the day. It's 4:30 in the morning.
Right.
And the reason that many people were out there was because they're so desperate for food and assistance. When aid trucks roll in, especially in the middle of the night, you shouldn't have to see people swarming them for aid. They should have confidence
Right.
that aid will be distributed. But they don't right now, and for good reason, because aid hasn't been getting there, and they're desperate to feed their families.
Okay, but you don't doubt that the Israeli military fired on those people.
They have
That there were gunshots.
they have offered a public assessment of what's happened, and they said that they did fire in one context. We do not have any independent confirmation of how the actual events rolled out. I know that there are differing assessments and conflicting evidence about what happened, which is why we're going to wait the outcome of the investigation.
Shall we play the next video, or do you want to comment on this and the background to it first?
Well, it is important to comment on this particular video because the the message they're trying to send the State Department is that there was a lot of confusion. We don't know how these deaths occurred. while we know for a fact that these deaths occurred as a result of gunshots. I mean, we've seen testimony by doctors, nurses, and so on. Almost all the injured were injured by bullets, by gunshots, and so on. So to try to say, this is really, we don't know, it's the fog of war, we don't really understand, and so on, is basically giving Israel a pass. And this happens, Bassam, every time. I mean, it happened with Shireen Abu Akleh. They always find, something, Israel, but, that kind of a thing. I mean, when they said that, when let's say the military coordinator, General Zebulun, said that with the investigation of Shireen's assassination, he said, well, yes, the bullet was Israeli, the soldier was Israeli, but the intention was not there. So, I mean, they're always finding ways to keep, this Israeli exceptionalism. And it's a major thing. It's a major thing because my fear is that what happened last Thursday is probably a test balloon by the Israelis. They will probably do this again with the distribution of aid, because we've seen them do the same thing with hospitals. I mean, they attacked the Ahli hospital to see how the world will react, and then we saw them attack other hospitals and so on. Unless unless they are really cold, with the facts of what happened, and the world must take notice of this. This is likely to happen again.
Let's go to the next video. This will be more of the same. I think that was directly after. Let me cue it. One moment.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was supposed to come to you, but
Thank you, Matt. A couple of things. But I mean, as wonderful as it is to send in aid by airplanes, I mean, 38,000 meals. That's like 0.0717 to each one person. I mean, that's a very small amount. The best way, obviously, is via ground. And the U.S. can't send in trucks. I don't think that the Israelis would shoot or would fire on, American-controlled trailer trucks and so on.
So I think you number one are missing everything I just said, both in my opening comments and please don't interrupt, because I didn't interrupt you, about the.
Sorry, I had to stop this here, Saeed, because myself and so many other people comment on how the back and forth sometimes that takes place with the spokespeople includes some back and forth at the time that somebody's talking, especially if it's like a clarifying comment rather than an actual interruption, which you actually end up saying here, it's an interruption. And I will play that. I just wanted to stop this here to note that for some reason, when they are speaking with you, there is this problematic tone, which I cannot get over. And I just wanted to flag this, so when we get back to it, I'd love for you to address it. So I'll rewind a little bit.
0.07117 to each one person. I mean, that's a very small amount. The best way, obviously, is via ground. And the U.S. can't send in trucks. I don't think that the Israelis would shoot or would fire on, American-controlled trailer trucks and so on.
So I think you number one are missing everything I just said, both in my opening comments please don't interrupt, because I didn't interrupt you, about the fact that these airdrops are intended to supplement, not replace. And while they are insufficient by themselves, they are still important and will provide meals to people who otherwise did not have them. So we do feel they meet a critical need, and we will continue them. But that does not change the fundamental underlying issue, which is we do need to get more aid in through land delivery and potentially through sea delivery, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not dismissing the value of that. In fact, I asked that question last week if the U.S. would do something like this. Nor was I interrupting you. I'm just saying I realize that it's it's an effort, but it's a very small effort. There are other ways, and even by sea. I mean, I understand the U.S. military has these wonderful causeways. They can roll things in. You don't have to have a harbor and so on. But that is still inefficient. I mean, it's the United States and Egypt and so on. If there is a political decision, to ensure, to basically force Israel to allow trucks in, I believe that they will prevail. You don't think that the U.S. can prevail if it pressures Israel to allow these trucks in?
We are making clear that more trucks need to come in from the senior-most levels of this government.
Discuss.
Well, I mean, obviously, when he does that, spokespeople always they use this as, like when boxers are boxing, they rest for a moment and so on. He uses "please don't interrupt me" as a way to collect themselves and so on. I'm not really offended by it because I know I have that, the wherewithal to go on and ask my question and to continue. This does not disrupt me. I know if you look at it for the first time, it is really bothersome, but not in my case. I'm used to it. I know he says that because he needs to, or whoever the spokesperson is, to catch their breath and so on. I was trying to make the following point that dropping meals by air is showmanship. Is showmanship. They dropped Skittles and Tabasco sauce and things like this. And they dropped 38,000 ready to eat meals. And now I know I've seen these packages so many times. They've been around for so long. You know, they're small packages, and like I said, I was trying to make a point. This, this is 0.00017. That's exactly the number of how many persons can get a meal or part of a meal on this thing. So it just show it's really ineffective, inefficient, and very expensive. By the way, it is extremely expensive and takes great deal of logistics. I mean, it would be Israel if Israel allows American airplanes and Jordanian airplanes to do this, it would simply allow the trucks. I mean, this is the kind of mind-boggling gobbledygook that they are really involved in because no causeways, no sea. I mean, ferrying by sea is completely ineffective. We know that the U.S. has a great navy, as I was saying, and they have these means. I've seen these causeways in action. I know what they are, and I know how they hook and all that stuff. So, but still, that is ineffective. We have these, Rafah crossing. We have other crossings and so on. The United States can certainly force Israel to open all the crossings in the north, for instance, and have a far more effective way to send aid. But they don't. It is, aid in this case is weaponized. I mean, in the full meaning of the word, aid and starvation is being used as a weapon to really bring the Palestinians to submission. They feel it as a way to pressure the negotiations and do things of that nature, and the U.S. is going along. I don't buy it for a minute that the U.S. that gives Israel at least $4 billion a year in military aid, and we just saw that the president of the United States asked for $14 billion, does not have leverage. This is nonsense. I mean, this is really embarrassing for the United States of America to say a country that basically lives on an American umbilical cord in every way that is not pliable to U.S. pressure. That we give them all this money. I mean, I had this conversation last week with Miller, and I said, he talked about sovereignty and all these things, and countries are sovereign. Well, yeah, countries are sovereign, but when you give them my tax dollars and your tax dollars and everybody's tax dollars, you should have a leverage. You should say, look, I will not send you these bombs, these 2,000-pound bombs that you drop on people and kill them by the hundreds every day, unless you allow the trucks to go in. So all this is very, very quickly. All this is really a great deal of it is for show.
Let's go to the last video here.
Yeah, but I mean,
This is the last one from this exchange.
okay, a couple more questions. Of course, I think it was raised that there's something like 15 children that have already died of starvation in Gaza, and there seems to be maybe hundreds more in the coming days, and so on. So the situation is very, very desperate. Let me ask you about UNRWA. Have you arrived at a decision on continuing aid or resuming aid to UNRWA?
We have made clear that we are going to make that determination at the conclusion of the two investigations the UN is conducting with respect to UNRWA. Neither of those investigations has concluded at this
Do you
point.
have any calendar or timetable on this camp?
It's a-
Because
it's-
the people in UNRWA are saying that the situation is
So
horrible.
it's a question you should direct to the UN about how long those two investigations will take.
But you are not demanding that the UN, sort of speed up the process.
I think it's in the UN's interest that the investigations be completed as soon as possible. I'm sure that they're well aware of that.
And finally, I have one. Can you share with us any update on the talks?
On the hostage talks,
Right.
no, I'm not going to read those out in detail, other than to say, as I said in my opening comments, that there is a deal on the table, and that deal would get hostages out. It would deliver a temporary ceasefire of 6 weeks, and it would allow more aid to come in. So we hope Hamas will accept the deal.
One second. Go ahead. Sorry. All right, you're good now.
Yeah, we were talking about UNRWA, and UNRWA is a political issue. For the past, actually since Oslo, the Israelis have had the notion that maybe the time has come to end UNRWA, to completely dismantle it, because now that we have an agreement that was in the 90s, then we can find other means and so on to supply the refugees, because Israel considers UNRWA to be an address for Palestinian refugees. So long as there's UNRWA, then there are lists, there are people are counted as refugees. They are, despite the fact that they are spread out in 5 different countries, they are still Palestinian refugees. So the only way to liquidate the refugee issue and to sort of scratch the right to return once and for all is basically by dismantling UNRWA. This was a basic idea with Israel all along. Then in 2001, Israel really became very vigorous about this issue. And in fact, they launched think tanks in this town. One of them is FDD, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, that basically took on this very issue as its major issues. I mean, Iran became an issue, and nuclear weapons. But this, they testified. People from this organization went and testified in Congress, saying that the number of Palestinian refugees is no more than 30,000, maybe 60,000 at the very most, because a lot of them have died, and those who they're talking about, those who fled, and not their offspring, not their daughters and sons and grandkids and all these things. So the issue, and those who they're talking about, those their daughters and yeah.
Let's move, Saeed, to another topic that I've discussed with you before, which is the actual comrades that you have, the other journalists at these
Right.
briefings. Can you tell us a little bit about the other journalists' experiences and your conversations with them, as well as the notable lack or probably absence beyond yourself of Arab or Palestinian journalists at these briefings?
Right, that's a very good topic, and it's a very good issue because I tell you what. I mean, I go in. There are a few of us that go every day. There are those from the wires that actually do a lot of traveling with the Secretary of State. They're always with them. They go everywhere with them. We're talking about AP, Reuters, AFP, and others, and they're always there. And these journalists are very professional. They know the issues. They know the conflict. They know it very well. They have been at it for a very, very long time. And as we have seen since October 7 until now, this issue, the issue of Gaza, basically sucks a great deal of the oxygen. And as you have seen probably in yesterday's briefing or the briefing before and so on, you see that my colleagues from Reuters, Hamera Bamok, from AP, Matthew Lee, from AFP, Sean Tandon and others, and so many, many others. They all raise, from ABC, NBC, they are raising the good question. They are raising the tough question. And sometimes I piggyback on them, and other times it's the other way around. So the issue is now is their feet are being held to the fire by other journalists. So simply because of the drama of the issue itself, the fact that we see it before our eyes. I mean, this is probably the first time that the genocide is being carried live and being carried gavel to gavel. And social media has impacted this. So we're talking about, the corporate media is trying to play catch up. They're trying to play catch up. They cannot afford either to ignore or to play it down and so on. I mean, granted, they have to report on many other things. For sure, the United States has other foreign policy issues beside the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and beside other conflicts. I mean, they are, we have seen in the past few months, past 5 months, basically, that even the war in Ukraine is regressing in terms of where it stands on the totem pole and so on, or Iran or other issues and so on. So yes, my colleagues, and I will in a minute I will talk about my Arab and Palestinian colleagues, but my colleagues in the briefing room, we have an area that we call the bullpen where we all sit. There's about 19 agencies in that area, and we have gaggles in the morning that we can that's completely off the record, and then we have the briefings, which is completely on the record. And we exchange a lot of ideas. We sometimes say, what are you going to be talking about, what are you going to be asking about, and so on. We don't make a habit of it to quiz each other, but at times we do. Sometimes because of the sparsity of questions, especially when the Secretary of State is holding the briefing, then you have to decide what kind of questions and who's going to ask. They will never give me a question to ask the Secretary of State. I mean, Pompeo did a lot, but the Democrats have not given. I mean, Blinken has not given me a question in the briefing room yet. I've seen him, outside the briefing room. That's different. But and as far as the Arab journalists are concerned, there are Arab journalists. I mean, they do come, and from time to time they ask questions, but not it's a few and far in between. I mean, there are no Palestinian journalists working for a Palestinian media outlet that come to the briefing. I'm the only one. But there are people from, let's say, the satellite station, Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, others, and so on. They're always there. They come. They don't. My colleague from Al Arabiya, she always asks questions about Palestine and Gaza and all these things. I mean, because she is Gazan and she's a very good journalist, and she, but her beat is the White House. She comes occasionally to the briefing room. Other than that, Bassam, it really is not there. They are not there, and unfortunately, that leaves a large gap because as you said, I mean, as you saw, when I ask a question, he's going to say, "Please don't interrupt me," and he's going to move on because there are other people asking questions, and sometimes they need to ask about North Korea or about Latin America or South America or things like this. So, but if you have the more journalists that you have, and especially from that part of the world that know exactly what's going on and so on. They know what the priorities are. By not having them there, I think a great gap is left unfilled.
Saeed, I want to show some clips from a few months ago. But before that, can I ask you to share with us how you observed the briefings and the responses and the mood change over time, or has it changed at all? Because one of the things that is remarkable, which I shared already, when I show the clip, people will be aware of it more clearly. The discourse and the template has almost stayed the same, whether it was 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 dead. It's as though this increase in degree, which has become an increase in kind with the total destruction of life, as though these things are not important, and what's important is basically regurgitating a particular template. Have things changed in your experience in terms of the back and forth and the position of people like Miller?
Yes, absolutely. Because I tell you what, they deal with October 7 as the beginning of history. And this is where we are. I mean, and I always remind them this is history did not begin on October 7th. And a proof of that is the fact that I've been going there for 20 years, basically asking the same question, more than 20 years. I mean, we go back with Miller from last year. We go back with his predecessor for 2 years. We went back with his predecessor yet, and so on, and going all the way back. So this issue has been around and being, in fact, probed and pursued and vigorously at times all throughout. I mean, when the Israeli army assassinated Shirin Abu Akleh, we had a very vigorous exchange and so on, and it went on for days and weeks and so on. When we have the visa waiver, for instance, and all throughout last spring, and then well through the last summer, and then right when it was signed on in September, and so on. So to pretend, and that's what they are doing, to pretend that this is a whole new issue is wrong, and it's intended to mislead. And basically, they saw that with October 7, the gloves were off. They took off the gloves in terms of what Israel can do to the Palestinians. The Israelis saw a great opportunity to liquidate the Palestinian issue once and for all. They saw it as this is the time to basically ethnically cleanse Palestine of Palestinians. We can push them out. We can start with Gaza and hence the destruction and the amount of destruction that we have seen. So, yes, there is, I have asked with the same kind of tenacity and vigor, if you will, with the same kind of stubbornness about the Palestinian issues every day, because there were always Israeli atrocities, not with this size, not like this, not with this, overwhelming evidence of genocide, but all along the issue was there. So that's my first point. My second point is I've seen, that for the United States to justify its unequivocal support to Israel, it has basically, took the page out of the Israeli propagandists. I mean, sometimes they sound like the Israeli Hesperatis themselves. They repeat point for point what the Israeli propagandists say, whether it's about the rape issue, for instance, whether it's about decapitating babies. If you recall, in early October, the president himself came out and he says, I have seen decapitated pictures and videos of decapitated babies that turned out to be false. He did not see that. It did not happen. And then, the issue of rape, the same thing, did not. So what we see since October 7 until now is basically, with very few exceptions, what we have seen is the United States of America basically repeating, regurgitating, as you called it, the narrative, the Israeli narrative, on all issues, on all things. Whether it's the bombing, the number of people, the hospitals, and so on. The repeating that Hamas uses people as a human shield, and therefore Israel has a right to kill people, and so on. So this has been consistent, and it has. You're absolutely right. It is consistent with the numbers and the figures notwithstanding. I mean, I remember when early on when we said, there are 2,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of them women and children, and they say, well, these are Hamas figures. That's what they were saying. These are Hamas figures, and so on. And then it went on. Then until the deputy, the Undersecretary of State Barbara Lee went before Congress and said, actually, the figures are probably. I fear that the figures are higher than what Hamas is saying. Only then did they stop doubting and say that these figures are exaggerated. But even then, they from time to time they say, well, these are Hamas figures, and we cannot trusted. So we have seen that all along, and we have seen. I mean, look, in the first week, let's say maybe October 7th through October 17, let's say, when Al Ahli hospital was bombed, we saw that everybody was in shock. Not us, because we were used to Israeli atrocities and so on, but when everyone was in shock, first by Hamas being able to do what it did and so on, and being able to basically, breach Israeli defenses and destroy it, engage the Israeli army and send them running, basically, and so on, and was able to capture people and take them back to Gaza. This was a shock, and it was a shock that was, sort of framed in such atrocious things that Hamas has done, from rape to killing babies to doing all these things to, bayoneting, as some of them said, bayoneting pregnant women and all these things. So the journalists in the room were also, being fed what their editors and were required them to do. I mean, I don't want to pass any judgments, but we've seen it as things began to change. Then they began to question. When the Ahli was struck, for instance, who struck it? And then we heard that the State Department bought into the Israeli narrative that it was an errant Palestinian rocket fired by Islamic Jihad or something like this. While the thumbprint of what happened at Al Ahli, it clearly showed that it was an American-made JDAM bomb and so on. So then we began little by little to have, the questioning. Now my colleagues that work for American outfit and so on, they also go back and forth according to the priorities of their outfit and so on. So when there is a talk like now, for instance, about rape may have likely have occurred on October 7th and so on, you will find that they talk about this because that is the editorial line. But all in all, I think that the kind of discussion that has taken place in the briefing room for the better part of the last 5 months, for a good part of it, has always focused on the Israeli aggression, their transgressions, what they have done in terms of how they disallow food and or medicine to hospitals and so on. So yes, this is what the briefing room, when it comes to Gaza, is really focused on.
Thanks, Saeed. I'll move now to a clip from a few months ago, which sort of demonstrates what we are addressing.
Yeah, Saeed, go ahead.
So I understand you correctly. You're saying that the killing of 700 Palestinians over a period of 24.
Saeed, I always, I always like when I use my own words, not when you try to put words in my mouth.
I want to understand what you said properly. You said that we have seen improvement. I'm asking you directly. You think that the killing of 700 people in 24-hour period is an improvement? So I'm just asking you to say yes or no.
I don't
in accordance to what you said.
So Saeed, I don't think you were listening very closely to
what I said. I was listening very closely.
Well, clearly not, because what I said
Right.
is we have seen improvement in their plans for Khan Yunis, their plans for the South. We have seen them evacuate specific neighborhoods rather than entire areas. So the numbers of displaced persons will hopefully be lower in southern Gaza than it was in the north. But when it comes to results, we are going to monitor it very closely. And I think I was pretty clear about that. And I think the Secretary was pretty clear about that on Thursday.
Give us a figure. What would be acceptable? What would be acceptable? Because you talked about...
Saeed, we mourn the loss of every civilian life. We don't want to see any civilians killed in this.
What have you done to really minimize that? Remember, Gaza is the size of Washington, D.C. When you tell people to move, like now, and they have nowhere to go, they're striking in Khan Yunis. They're saying, actually, we're hitting every place in Gaza. So where should people go?
People should go.
Be the end?
Saeed, let's take it one question at a time. Before you asked a question, let me answer.
Sure.
People should go to the UN designated sites that are on Israeli lists as deconfliction zones that should not be the target of military campaigns. There are already people who are sheltering in those. As the campaign moves to the south and Israel evacuates specific neighborhoods or orders specific neighborhoods to be evacuated, That is where people should go.
Okay, but we know that they bombed UN facilities and so on. Let me ask you a couple of other questions. You said that Hamas committed atrocities, right? Okay. Do you call the killing of 20,000 Palestinians an atrocity?
So,
Does that befit the term atrocity?
Saeed, I was speaking to the intentional
Right.
murdering of civilians that we saw Hamas commit. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is anyone questioning that Hamas intentionally killed civilians.
Right.
That
And
is
you
by
don't think-
that is by definition an atrocity.
And you don't think that Israel intentionally killed civilians?
We think far
When
too
you
many
bomb
people.
not- when you bomb neighborhoods,
I have not seen evidence that they are intentionally
There's
killing
none.
civilians. We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation, which is that Hamas has embedded itself inside civilians, inside civilian homes, inside mosques, in schools, in churches. It is Hamas that is putting these civilians in harm's way. For all the questions, and I understand why people I stand here and people ask me questions about what Israel should do. I'm happy to take those questions.
Right.
I'm surprised I don't hear more people saying, why doesn't Hamas lay down its arms? Why doesn't Hamas move out of schools?
So you're
Why
asking-
doesn't Hamas take additional steps
So-
to protect
so you-
civilians? Because
okay.
we think they should, as we think Israel should.
Okay, so you are asking Hamas to surrender. Is that what you're asking them to do?
We would
Right
welcome Hamas laying down its
Hamas-
arms and surrendering at any point.
Hamas is not an army. They don't have air force. They don't have a navy. They don't have artillery. They have none of these things. They don't really have any kind of regular kind of structure that they can conduct their surrender.
You know, that Saeed, they may not have a navy.
Well,
No. Let me finish. They may not have an air force. They have sufficient firepower to have killed 1,200 people on October 7th. So don't tell me that Hamas can't lay down their arms and take additional steps to protect civilians, let alone moving out of all the areas that are putting Palestinian civilians in harm's way. They absolutely can. They could do it today if they cared at all about civilian life.
My last question to you, the UN, a former official in the UN, Mr. Mukaiber, said that the most clear-cut case of genocide, the Israeli bombardment and the killing of 20,000 people thus far, is the most clear-cut case of genocide. Do you agree with him?
So the State Department has a rigorous process for evaluating what constitutes genocide, ethnic cleansing, or a crime against humanity. Those are terms we only use with very explicit care. You've seen us be very You've seen us be very deliberate about that in the past. We are monitoring the evolving situations and are examining facts as they develop. It's an extremely challenging space to get all the information that might be available, but we support Israel's right to continue to take action to ensure that Hamas can never conduct terrorist attacks like it did on October 7th again. And as part of that, we urge Israel to take all possible measures to minimize civilian harm. And I've just gone through a number of those measures.
But it doesn't qualify for genocide.
I just answered that. Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you.
We lost Saeed, so we will wait until he calls back. In the meantime, I will play another video. I have no idea. And I can even put him on the phone. We'll let you digest what you just saw in the meantime. So while he attempts to call back, let me play another video and we will tell him what the content was.
Yeah, Saeed, go ahead. I don't have a comment on it. Go ahead, Saeed.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Sean's question on the sanctions that the president.
Against settlers and so on. There are many settlers, thousands of settlers, who hold U.S. passports. They are U.S. citizens. In this case, you cannot, of course, deny them a visa, but will you prosecute them if it's proven that they have participated in criminal acts?
Saeed, I would want to preview any action before it's taken, and certainly The State Department does not prosecute anyone, and I wouldn't want to
I'm
comment
just
on.
saying.
No, but as you know, we have strict rules inside the United States government. Those decisions are made by the Justice Department. We don't comment on them or participate in them at any other agency.
Okay, so what kind of other sanctions you might?
Again, Saeed, I don't want to preview any steps that we might take. I will reiterate that our first priority is for the government of Israel to take action against those extremists who are committing violence against Palestinians. But we have options at our disposal as well that we will use if appropriate.
Okay, a couple of questions on Gaza. But before I ask on Gaza, today, I don't think you probably know about this, but there's a poet named Mus'ab Abu Taha, young poet. His son is U.S. citizen, born in this country. Abu Taha was a scholar at Harvard. Today he was leaving after speaking with the embassy, apparently, and he was trying to leave, and he was basically taken away and his toddler given to his mom and so on. Is there anything that his family should be doing with the United States, since more than likely he was probably on his way to the United States?
I don't have the details of that
I
case,
will
so it's
send
very,
you the
no,
details.
hold this. Let me establish the ground rule again. I will not interrupt your questions. Don't interrupt my answer, please. I don't have the details of that case, and so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on them without having the full range of it, full details.
Okay, I'll send you the details now. Look, I mean, you know, we have the figures are really gruesome. I mean, I don't know. Is this administration, and I say this with no, has it become numb to the number of Palestinians killed every day? I mean, are you okay with like 13,000 that have been killed thus far? Where are we going to stop?
Saeed,
Where are we going to stop?
You have heard the president speak to this. You have heard the secretary speak to this. You've heard the secretary say that far too many Palestinians have been killed as a result of this conflict. Every innocent life that's lost is a tragedy, and we mourn the loss of every innocent life. These are civilians whose deaths have come through no fault of their own, that are in the conflict that is not of their own making. And I can tell you, speaking for myself, speaking for everyone in this administration, that we feel those deaths every bit as we feel the loss of Israeli civilian lives. And so that is why when we set out to develop our policies and have conversations with the government of Israel and with others in the region, we have a number of principles that we have made very clear. Number one, as Israel conducts a legitimate operation to prevent the terrorists that attacked it on October 7th from being able to do so again, it does so in accordance with humanitarian law, and it tries to the greatest extent possible to minimize civilian harm. Number two, we want to see civilians protected. We want to see civilian infrastructure protected. And number three, we want to get humanitarian assistance to those in need. That is what we can do at the policy level from the United States government. It's what we continue to do to try to minimize civilian suffering, to try to help those civilians who are in Gaza. But at the same time, we see every one of those deaths and we mourn each and every one of them.
The president said that, you know, he envisions a Palestinian state that will include Gaza and the West Bank and so on. So let me ask you this. Or is it safe to assume that the administration has some sort of vision how this very battle should end?
I don't want to get to how this conflict will end, because ultimately it's very hard to prescribe from a podium, it's hard to prescribe from a podium thousands of miles away how a military operation, which is of course unpredictable by its nature, we've seen that multiple times throughout history, how it will end and what will be left in the aftermath. So where we are right now is laying out principles. And you've heard the Secretary articulate some of those principles with respect to Gaza, that there should be no diminution in the territory of Gaza, that no Palestinians should be displaced from Gaza, a number of other principles, and also heard him and the President articulate that ultimately at the end of this, we want to see the establishment of a Palestinian state that unites the West Bank and unites Gaza, so the Palestinian people can determine their own future. And that is the policy that we support. It's the policy that we will try to achieve.
All right. A lot to discuss, but let me just say that this was in November, mid-November, when the death toll was around 13,000. And I do dislike having to go through the numbers of dead people. But the fact was that 13,000 were killed, the language was very similar to the language that was used when just a couple of thousand Palestinians were killed by Israel a few weeks before. And now, when 30 plus thousand are killed and more than 72,000 injured, the language is still the same. I also should say that the first video I showed was not from several months ago. It was actually uh, a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago or so, when the death toll was higher than 13,000. So I apologize about that. Any comments on this exchange which took place in mid-November, which seems ages away now, but of course, listening to the spokesperson, you would think that this is happening now because it's the same approach.
Yes, it is. It is very important, and in fact, it does have a significance for me because they arrested this poet, and I raised his issue and so on, and the following day he was released. I'm not saying that the Americans had anything to do with it or my questions had anything to do with that, but that's the kind of thing. Those are the kind of messages that you hope would actually be out there and people would take note of it, because when you raise the issues, I mean, when we going back to the Pompeo administration, I mean, when you raise the issue of, let's say, the hunger strikers and so on, it does make a difference. That's why it is very important for journalists and Arab and Palestinian and all kinds of journalists to continue to ask these questions. On the issue of the figures, which you raise a very, I mean, it's horrible to talk about the figures and the numbers every day, and we saw the same thing when there were 2,000, then a few weeks later, when after the ceasefire, let's say in the 8th November, same thing in December, the same thing in January, the same thing in February. Now we are in March. So the United States has kept its policy, and it's exactly what Miller said. He said that we want to make sure that this does not happen again. This means that the policy of the United States has not changed since day one, despite the fact that these goals have not been achieved and they are not likely to be achieved. They believe, and let me just, note something here. Now, I ask these questions, and every time I get the questions, it's a courtesy. I don't have a right to ask. I mean, I don't have a right for them to call me. The spokesperson can literally bypass me. So his calling on me or my colleagues and so on, it is completely courteous. But if I am called upon, I am going to call these issues. I am going to raise them, and I'm going to raise them as vigorously as I can possibly do. You know, because when you talk about issues of 10,000 dead, then 13,000 dead, then 20,000 dead, then 30,000 dead, and then God knows how many more. How many people are under the rubble, for instance. Nobody knows how many people are under the rubble. How many people are now, suffer from disease and will end up dying as a maybe not a direct result of bombing, but as a direct result of this war. So for these figures mean a great deal, and they should not be stated either by the questioner or by this who answers as a mere statistics. They are families. I mean, Gaza is probably the only place in modern times where dozens of the same family die because people go together. When one area is bombed, they go to other members of the family. So it gets bombed. So you have this extended family that are killed 80 people, 70 people, 60 people of the same family. So these figures, they are they reflect the first of all the type of society that we have as Palestinians, and it's a very close knit society. Yeah, they have large families. All these figures are made up of families. All of it. It's not that these are not soldiers in battle. This is not Stalingrad. This is not the Ardennes. This is not the Battle of the Bulge, for instance, where soldiers are facing soldiers. No, Israel is taking it out on civilians who are basically refugees, living in refugee situations and have been living in refugee camps and refugee neighborhoods since for 75 years. So, you know, we should never lose sight of that. That these are, as huge as these figures are, as big as these numbers are, they are made up of families, real close families, whether it's an immediate family unit or a larger extended family.
Thank you, Saeed.
I lost you.
Sorry. Thank you,
Hmm.
Saeed. The mute button phenomenon is gonna define the 21st
Yeah,
century.
right.
Before I move on, now that I interrupted myself, let me say that we are very happy to get all kinds of infinitely critical comments of what we're saying, what the guest is saying, what I am saying, what's happening in the world, whether it is this or that side. We're very happy to get these comments online. You can go like literally to the end of the world as far as I'm concerned when I'm running these conversations. You will not be booted. You're totally fine. And I've done this now once or twice in the past 5 months in about more than 60 broadcasts. But when somebody calls the guest names, it's incumbent upon me to remove that person from the comment section. If you call the guest's arguments problematic or erroneous or even worse than that, in a reasonable uh, debunking of whatever is being said, or if you want to support any statements or people or states, and remark regardless of how problematic these might be on all sides, you're fine. But when you start calling guests names, and when you use that kind of personal sort of attacks and smearing, I have to remove you. So I don't want to hear anyone saying that anybody was silenced. Nobody is silenced, but I'm not gonna even repeat the names that were used. But when that happens, I'm going to remove you. And you're welcome to come back if you don't want to use this language regarding the speaker personally, not their arguments. You can say anything about the arguments or the conversation. Sorry, Saeed, I just had to share this.
No, no problem.
I think some people sometimes, as a function of the compelling nature of our guests, and the very mild conversation that is, reasonable and calm, I think they get even more agitated. All right.
Yeah.
So let's go to this other topic very quickly, which is the idea of, I don't want to say uniqueness. We've had this conversation before. I don't like the word uniqueness, but the specificity of Biden's support compared to Israel, compared
Right.
to other presidents. To be sure, even Obama, the one who was heralded as somebody who's going to come and try to move the needle on the question of social justice, foreign policy, and so on, has actually been one of the greatest supporters of Israel in terms of the support, financial or otherwise, and was pretty much disappointing for a lot of people who had much higher hopes on this issue and frankly on other issues, but that's not the point right now. Trump was also someone who actually made moves and statements and allowed for things to happen that were quite egregious in terms of international law, in terms of annexation, the movement of the embassy. But there is something about Biden, according to everybody who's been working on this topic reasonably, that is different. That's very specific. It's almost like he, as you and I talked about, he's almost like a believer rather than a strategist who is supporting Israel for whatever political reasons. Can you address that based on your long tenure in observing officials and presidents on this topic?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a very important topic, and it's very important for us to understand. Yeah, now you mentioned Obama. Obama was probably the first one to use drones, for instance, so hugely in places like Yemen and other places. He allowed NATO to destroy Libya and so on, and he really basically did not do much for the Palestinians, despite effort to start the talks in 2014 and then give Israel a pass when they pulled out of these talks and went on to bomb Gaza and do it for 52 days. So, yeah, I mean, you have to take that in perspective. But with Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has taken every opportunity to convince us, the people that, the American public, that he is a Zionist. I mean, he says it every time. He's proud of it. He keeps saying, I am a Zionist. He keeps saying, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. He's proud of the fact that he met with Golda Meir. He says that he met with Golda Meir. Some people question whether he did or not, but he said that he met with Golda Meir. His record on Israel is amazing. He's voted for every possible Israeli weapon system, money, whatever, support in the UN and all these things, all throughout. He stood very firmly against, Zionism equal to racism, for instance, in the 70s and so on. He basically has taken steps to prove, and to show that he has been unflinching, which he has, unflinching in his support for Israel's aggression, its occupation of places like Beirut. I mean, none other than Menachem Begin in 1982. He came here during the invasion to talk to senators and American politicians and so on, and went back. And he was during a press conference. He said, "Well, a lot of them were upset and were concerned about civilian casualties, except for this one young senator, and that was Senator Joe Biden." I mean, that was Menachem Begin saying that Joe Biden was fine with our bombing. He said that if he would do the same thing, he said he understands it and supports it and all these things. So he has had a very consistent, very strong support. He's probably the only president that keeps saying from time, repeatedly that if Israel was not there, we would create it. I mean, he kept saying that. He says it. That is on the record. I'm not, making anything up and so on. And so, yes, he's been very strong supporter of Israel, but not only of Israel. I mean, all the presidents were supportive of Israel, but you would express, some concern. For instance, in 1982, on August 12, 1982, Israel bombed and killed lots of civilians. And Reagan, who was a very, close friend of Israel, and well, he really had not much love for the Palestinians, but he picked up the phone and he called Menachem Begin and he says, "Menachem, this has to stop. This is a Holocaust." And Begin responded by saying, "Well, I know what a Holocaust is." And he said, "This has to stop." He did not, he didn't, he was not taken aback and so on. And it stopped 20 minutes later, to the point where Reagan himself, he says, "Wow, I didn't know I have so much power." Biden himself, in May 2021, basically picked up the phone and talked to Netanyahu and told him, "You have run out of runway. You are at the end of the runway in terms of the bombing," and made him stop. So he has very strong credentials in terms of his support for Israel, but he's the president of the United States. The president of the United States is clothed with amazing power. Sure, we are, we have legislative and judicial and executive branch, but the president of the United States is unlike any other president. He does not have a prime minister. He makes all the decisions. He can wage nuclear holocaust anywhere in the world at any time. He moves around with the so-called football, which has the codes and so on for nuclear bombing. So yes, he has a strong credentials to in terms of support for Israel, but he's still, when people say, what can I do? I tried to pressure them, but they're not listening to me. No, he's basically in tandem with them. He is in step. He supports this genocide. And the moment he stops supporting it, even for a moment, he will call for a ceasefire, and you will see a ceasefire take place almost immediately.
In relation to this, Saeed, we've heard over the decades, since I can remember from the 1980s, uh, we've heard statements and claims about Israel's support Israel's quote unquote influence in the United States, and sometimes control, which I personally have an issue with, because there is so much to say about the U.S. being the final arbiter here. It's not being led and controlled and so on, as many say. But this keeps happening, and in relation to this point, which actually demonstrates, as we have seen before, that once the U.S. wants to take a decision, it's obvious who is calling the shots. Can you address this? I don't know what the expression is. I've been living here for 40 years. I still get the expressions wrong. The tail and the dog wagging the tail,
Right,
or the tail wagging the dog.
right.
Can you address this a little bit
Yes,
for us,
absolutely.
based on
Right.
your
Well,
first-hand
for sure,
experience?
yeah, for sure, the tail is not wagging the dog, not in this situation. It is the dog that wags the tail. In this relationship, and we'll talk about the part of the Israeli lobby, so to speak. You know, in this situation, in the relationship between the United States and Israel, Israel is a client state. Israel lives on an American umbilical cord, financially, militarily, politically, as we have seen time and time again, including last week, twice. We have seen the United States of America veto condemning the killing of civilians when they were out there trying to get a piece of bread. We saw it veto it. 14 members voted to condemn, including America's allies, the UK and France, but not the US. They vetoed the week before. They vetoed a resolution for a ceasefire. So it gives it all this cover. It gives it all the military equipment to do what it's done. It gives it. It has kept it from adhering to all international resolutions. UN resolutions, whether it's 242, 338. All the other resolutions, 23, 2330, most recently, and so on. It has called half-heartedly on Israel to stop the settlement, but it has never done anything really to enforce its calls. So, yes, the U.S. is boss. In this relationship, the United States is boss. In fact, the United States treats all its allies as client states. We've seen this with Germany, which is a very powerful country. But when they told them, look, you have to stop getting oil from Russia. I mean, Germany did something that really undermined its own economy big time, big time. When it told Germany that has committed itself to not, to having weapons or shipping weapons and so on, they made them ship weapons to Ukraine. So the U.S. is boss with all its allies. It has no allies. It has client states with varying degrees. Israel is a client state. You know, sure, the Israeli lobby is powerful. APAC is powerful. There are about 20, 21, 25 lobbies that work on behalf of Israel, but they only work as far as the system itself, the establishment itself, allow them to work. So they can raise money. They can. I mean, APAC has allocated about $100 million for this election, to ensure that Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar or Cory Bush or Summer Lee or Jamal Bowman, a number of the progressives are not reelected. So they try to do that, but only as far as the U.S. would allow it to do. I mean, if the United States, for instance, want to basically clip or lop the power of these organizations, very simply, it will term them as foreign agent. Then there you go, it's gone. As a foreign agent, its ability to lobby and spend money and affect and impact elections would end. So, I mean, so that we can understand how this thing works. To say that, the tail is wagging the dog, the tail is not wagging the dog. It is exactly the United States of America. We've seen this with Reagan, the example that I stated. We saw this with Biden in 2021, in May 2021. So we can see this, and we can. I've been around this town for so long, Bassam, that I fully know. I fully know the extent of power for the lobby, and in the end, who's boss. Remember, in 1973, Kissinger and Nixon, they cut off aid. They cut off all aid to Israel when it was surrounding the Egyptian Third Army without going to Congress. So because the president holds so much power. So if they decide that the time has come to stop this genocide, to stop this killing, you can rest assured that they can do this. They can pull it out. Otherwise, Bassam, you will not see that a member of the cabinet, of the Israeli cabinet, like Benny Gantz, come to Washington, in defiance of his prime minister or government. So that tells you where who controls who.
Thanks, Saeed. In relation to this U.S. view, vision, control, influence, and initiative vis-a-vis what Israel does to an extent, I want to show a clip which sort of unusually shows you being animated in addressing the spokesperson on the question of the status that the U.S. confers on Palestine. This is a few months ago. I'm assuming it's actually even prior to October 7th, but it is it's an important exchange. So let me cue it.
I don't have a comment on it. Go ahead, Saeed.
What kind of designation you give the Palestinians in the West Bank?
That they reside in those territories.
They reside in that totally independent of the rest of the world, as if it were a different planet. Are they occupied, for instance? Do you subscribe to the fact that they are under military occupation?
Said,
It's a simple question. Are they under occupation?
Said, let me say a couple of things to the point that I believe.
Are they occupied or are they not occupied? What is the status that you give the Palestinians right at this moment? What kind of status do they have?
Said, the recent period has seen a sharp.
I'm not talking about a recent period. I am saying about legally. How do you designate the Palestinians in the West Bank? What is their status?
Said, I understand the question you're asking, and as we've said previously, it is vital for both sides to take action to prevent even greater loss, and we condemn any violence, escalation, or provocation.
So this is really remarkable. That something that straightforward was very difficult to assess. We did, I think, lose Saeed. Did we lose you, Saeed? Well, I think we lost Saeed. Let me see if we can ask him to reconnect. Hi, Saeed. We lost him again. I think he'll connect one more. We'll try again, and then we might have to break, given that we are. Saeed is texting me saying we're being hacked. I don't know if there's a smiley face there or not. It's okay. I mean, people usually get hacked when they're doing something right. So let me just say a couple of things as we wait for Saeed to come back. If not, we will actually move on and conclude this conversation. Next week, we are going to hold our 25th teach-in which is different than conversations like these. These teachings are actually geared towards the classroom and have a long shelf life beyond the moment. And that teaching will be actually titled, it'll be with our guest, Rana Barakat from the West Bank. She's a professor, and she is going to be addressing from the ongoing Nakba to ongoing return, Palestinian stories. And this will be on Thursday at 1 p.m. EST next Thursday. So please join us then. And here we go. Saeed's with us. Saeed,
That
I showed the clip, and we were going to conclude, but I'm so glad that you came back so that you can address the clip, and then we will release you
yes, yes. Yeah,
from this long interview.
yes. Look, this was several months back, and it was with the deputy spokesman.
Yeah,
And imagine they would not even say something that they are on the record saying time and time and time
exactly.
again. The
That's why I
United
showed
States
it.
of America is a sponsor of 242, is a sponsor of 336, which says that the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the Golan Heights are occupied. They are on the record. So if they have moved so far away, they have lost touch of reality so far. Because remember, Pompeo said it's not occupied. The former administration said that it was not occupied. They didn't come up with any definition. So I was asking him, is it occupied or is it not? Because I had asked, do you still subscribe to the same policy that the former administration did? And they would never answer. Now, to his credit, the following day, uh, you know, uh, Vedant Patel, the deputy spokesman, came out and gave a statement at the very beginning and said that that the West Bank is occupied and East Jerusalem is occupied, and that's what we recognize. But it is the kind of statement that boggles the mind. If you can't admit something that you are a co-sponsor of, in terms of this policy and how to move forward.
Thank you. We There's quite a bit that we can talk about, and there are other videos, but I'm gonna stop here. We are hitting the 90-minute mark. Thank you so much, Saeed,
Thank you.
for everything that you do. You have been dubbed the questioner in chief, and I do know that this doesn't even affect you because you've been doing your job so diligently and professionally, regardless. I am very happy that we had this chance to speak. I hope we don't keep having these conversations because the absurdity of the situation is causing us to address these things more and more. I hope that sort of is notched down. Um, I would like to leave the last word to you if you have anything to share regarding the coming period and your sort of assessment of whether March 10th is still a meaningful date in any way, shape, or form, and then we will let you go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It is really an honor every time I'm with you, period, because I'm always learning from you and from Noura for sure. So it is always a joy and a learning experience to be with you guys.
Habibi.
You mentioned, I guess the beginning of Ramadan, which is March 10 or 11. We are led to believe that this is some sort of a magic day, and you know, I am not as optimistic as I was last week in terms of a ceasefire. I hope it happens because it will be definitely for the benefit of the Palestinians that have shown amazing resilience and heroism. I mean, they're not only as fighters, but as people, who can endure and go on. And despite the fact that they lose their loved ones day in and day out, they show every sign, every strength to continue on. So I look forward to my next time with you. We hope that it will be, a more hopeful time for all Palestinians. But one thing for sure, Bassam, I think that today the Palestinian cause has a great deal more support all throughout the world than it ever had before.
Saeed, I'm just joking. I'm just relaying Miller to
I
everybody.
got you.
Saeed. this is like this is etched in so many of our minds because of the way he does that. We almost look forward to them doing that because there's something about it that's actually absurd and comical. But I hope that you continue to do what you're doing, and I commend you for the patience that you have. So many other people, that's the one thing they definitely always comment on, and thank you for that, because that's an example for so many up and coming journalists to actually take. There were times when you were able to respond and debunk and sort of carry on the conversation, especially when something really problematic was uttered in the last words of a statement by some of the spokespeople, and you simply go on to the next question. The ability to do that is really remarkable. Anyway, thank you so much, Saeed. We will
Thank
see
you.
you soon.
Take care.
Please be safe, and thanks everyone. We will see you again, I am sure, and be safe, everyone. Salam.
Thank you.